Hello everyone, my name is Chris Hartley, and I'm here to talk about insects for Nature's Not Cancelled. I am sorry that I can't appear on camera and in person with you all today, but I've got a lot of fun things to show you and a lot of fun facts to share about my favorite group of animals, the insects. So I'm an entomologist, and I have been an entomologist for about 20 years now. I find insects to be an utterly fascinating topic. I hope you'll enjoy learning about them with me today. Insects really make the world work. They are involved in every ecosystem and involved in so many different ways for helping the planet run. And there's a lot of good they do for us humans too. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, right now, we are looking at a jewel beetle on this flower. The jewel beetles are so called because some members of the family are incredibly beautifully colored. Iridescent blues and greens and silvery metallic hues. This particular one has less to show in the way of metallics, but it's still very pretty. And it's one of the ones commonly found on flowers. Now, for many people, when we think of insects, we often do think of the pollinators first. Bees, butterflies, flies, and the other pollinators. That's definitely one of the most important services that insects perform. And it's so important that it deserves a show of its own, which it's going to get. So let's talk about some of the many different ways that insects do help us. If I zoom back to show you the woodlands where I am, you might imagine that this place is a hotbed of diversity for insects and all sorts of other living things too. You'd be right. There's quite a lot of insects here on the plants, under the leaves, under the ground, under these logs, up in the trees, really in all sorts of different places. But that's true of every habitat too. There are insects in the desert. There are insects in the tundra. There are insects in the prairie. Just about every habitat that you can name does have insects. There's one major place on Earth that doesn't have any insects, and that is the ocean. Fun fact, there's only one truly marine species of insect. It's a kind of water strider, or sometimes known as pond skaters, the ones that scoot around on the surface of the water. So even though it does live on the ocean, it doesn't live in the ocean, only on the surface. So the ocean is the one place the insects haven't really gotten to. I'm going to start off by showing you one of the most important roles that insects serve, besides pollination. And that is tilling the soil, enriching the soil, adding organic matter to the soil, and basically making it easier for plants to grow. When you see a log like this in the woods, and of course all the dead leaves and everything else that surrounds them, you are looking at prime insect habitat. There are so many different kinds of insects that work in habitats like this. And full disclosure, as we go through our presentation today, we're going to see a lot of insects. We're also going to see some other arthropods who are insect relatives, but not true insects. If you remember from when you were learning about the different types of animals, to be an insect, you need to have 6 legs, 3 body parts, the head, thorax, and abdomen, and 2 antennae. So let's take a look at some of the cool bugs that you might find in a habitat like this that are not insects, but very close relatives to them. So this little creature is a millipede. Now millipedes are very, very common in habitats like this. You've probably seen quite a lot in your yard or in a park or under logs or places like that. Let me see if I can get a better view of him. So millipedes have way too many legs to be an insect. They have legs all the way down their body. And in fact, if you get a really close look at any millipede, they have 4 legs on every body segment. And you can kind of see the segments as those rings that outline the body. They have 2 antennae at the front of their head, which you can see waving around there. And they are very, very commonly found in habitats such as the one we're in right now. Woodlands, under logs, places like that. What are they doing in those habitats? Well, they're eating the dead leaves. In many cases, they're eating rotting wood, or they're eating mushrooms or dead plants or things like that that you might find. They're decomposing them, they're turning them back into soil, and they're enriching the habitat that way. Another animal that you might find also in this habitat that looks a lot like a millipede, but is not, is often confused with them in fact, is a centipede. So this is a centipede right here. Probably the first thing you notice about it that's really different than the millipedes is that it's very fast. In fact, I might have a hard time keeping up with it here. There it is. When you catch a glimpse of them side by side, though, the other thing you'll notice is that the millipede does not have legs that stick out to the side like the centipedes do. The centipede's legs are fewer in number. There's only one pair of legs per body segment. And as you can see, they really stick out to the side as he runs. Centipedes also run very, very fast because they are predators. They hunt down and catch other little bugs. So they're an important part of the soil ecosystem as well as the millipedes, but they do a different job, the job of the predator who controls the little bugs that can overpopulate if they don't have something to predate them. So millipedes and centipedes. We're going to go ahead and release these guys back into the soil here where we found them so they can go back to doing the important job that they do. Alright, so before we leave the log here, let's talk about some of the true insects that might be found here. Now, one that I found here that would be really common here is actually not a grown-up insect at all. It's a grub. Now grubs, in fact the kind of grubs that I'm about to show you, you might find in your own yard. You might be very familiar with, in fact. These are scarab beetle grubs. Does that look familiar? There's a lot of different kinds of them, but when you uncover them, they almost always roll up into that shape vaguely resembling the letter C. That's a scarab grub, and a scarab is a kind of beetle. You may have heard of scarabs talked about in movies or in books or in other places. When people talk about scarabs, they're actually referring to an incredibly large family of beetles with tens of thousands of species. Beetles as a whole are the most specious kinds of insects that there are. There are more kinds of beetle than there are kind of any other living thing. Notice that I didn't say insects, I said any other living thing. There are more beetles than there are mammals. There are more beetles than there are fish. There are more beetles than there are plants. They are the most diverse group of organisms on this planet. Now these guys don't do very well when they're out of the ground. You can see they're kind of stumbling around, and I'm going to put them back under this log before I move on. But these are incredibly important decomposers, just like the millipede. They are under logs or sometimes in the roots of plants. Some of them, unfortunately for us, are pretty common in turf grass where they can actually be a pest. But in most circumstances, they're not pests. They are just living under the ground, trying to get enough food to grow up and become adult beetles. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to gently set these guys back at the base of the log. So before we move on from here, there is one more bug that I wanted to show you. This is a grown-up beetle. It's called a Rove Beetle. Let's see if we can take a look at the Rove Beetle. Now, let me emphasize that this is not the grown-up version of the beetle grubs that I was just showing you. This is a Rove Beetle, and that's R-O-V-E, if you've never heard of one before. Rove beetles are predators. They are like the centipede of the insect world, and they're one of many, many different kinds of predatory beetles that you could find in a habitat like this. Others being ground beetles, ladybugs, which are also beetles, are predators, just in a different kind of habitat. So the Rove Beetle here was likely hanging out under this log, waiting to eat maybe a smaller grub than the ones I just showed you. Maybe he'll eat an earthworm. Maybe he'll eat a fly larva, a maggot, or something like that. But the Rove Beetle is one of the important links in the food web under the soil here too. All right, so let me just return him. So those are some of the insects of the forest that we have here. Now, the really, really cool thing about a forest area like this is that even if you are an entomologist like me, even if you've spent an awfully long time looking for bugs and learning where they live and learning all about them, it can really be hard to find a lot of the bugs that are out here. They're very good at hiding. They're very good at staying away from people. or from predators, or from birds, or anything like that that might want to feed upon them. So that's one thing that is often kind of vexing to people who want to find more bugs, to take pictures of them, or something like that. So there's a couple of techniques that people use to kind of uncover them. One being that you can actually beat bugs out of a tree, or a bush, or something like that. So I'm going to demonstrate kind of what that looks like. And I don't know that we will really get anything, but we're going to try. So let's say we have this bush here. Let me take my handy bowl from before. All right. We'll hold that there for a second. Forgive the shaky camera work. But taking a stick now, which I have here in my hand, we're just going to gently beat the bush above the camera. All right. So we did knock off a few leaves, even though it was trying to be gentle. Now, I will tell you guys that there's something, I don't know if you can see it on camera. Oh, you actually can see it moving. It just looks like a little brown moving speck. We did uncover what is a tiny little beetle. Not exactly sure what kind it is without getting out a magnifying lens probably. But there are really lots of things out here in the forest that you might be able to uncover just by doing things like that. Other ways that people find the insects that are kind of hidden in places like this is they actually sort through the leaf litter. People also uncover or turn over rather logs and stones and things like that. And I will encourage you all to go out and explore and do some of that. Of course, if you do, keep in mind, you want to put back anything you uncover. You want to be good stewards of the land you're found in. And also, beyond just being nice to the habitat, if you uncover a log, you uncovered that animal's home. So you want to put it back too so that they can have their home to continue living in. Now, we're going to take a walk because I found a really cool insect home down this way that I'm excited to show you all. So, in a forest, like the forest that I'm in now, it's very common to find standing dead trees, and that's what we're looking at now. These dead trees are such an incredibly important part of the environment. It's a shame that in our cities we need to cut down so many of them just to make our cities safe. And sometimes you do. You know, if they're threatening to fall on a house or a power line or something like that, you know, first priority needs to be making sure they're not in a dangerous place. But in a natural environment like this, they are home for so many different things. I happen to know that there's a woodpecker high up in this tree that's making a house. I don't know if I can get it on camera for you. But what I wanted to show you all are these holes here. Some of them, I'm kind of keeping my camera pointed up because I'm hoping we might get lucky and see one of the little inhabitants of these holes coming out. There are little bees that are nesting inside this tree. And they are using these holes as a place to raise their babies. There's a tremendous diversity of bees. It goes so far beyond honeybees and bumblebees that most people don't realize just how many different kinds of bees there are out there. In North America, there's over 3,000 species of bee. And they nest in hollow stems, inside natural cavities such as the ones we're looking at now, or in cavities under the ground. Only the honeybee makes a hive like we're familiar with when we think of bees. And only the honeybee has, you know, thousands of worker bees and exhibits such vast numbers as we're probably used to thinking about when we think of a beehive. Some of the others, like bumblebees, do have small colonies that top out at probably a few dozen individuals. For some of the bigger ones, maybe 100 or two. But most of the bees, like the ones that we're looking at now, are solitary, meaning that it's one mother bee who does all the work of building the nest and raising the young and taking care of them. And this is quite a habitat for them right here. All of these holes, they may not all be active now, but at some point all of these holes were a home for some kind of insect. And it very well may be for other insects besides the bees that were here too. Alright, so we're going to move to one more habitat. Not too far away now. So here's another fallen log. And what I want to show you here are these really cool patterns on the wood. So those patterns were made while this was still a living tree. They were made by bark beetles, and there's many, many, many different kinds of bark beetles. What you see down the middle, this is where the mother beetle actually laid eggs in a line, and these really cool spidery patterns that come out, that was actually made by the larvae of the beetle, or the grub of the beetle, as it sought food. Remember, this happened while this tree was still living, so it had all the xylem and phloem and all the growing tissues of the tree to feed upon at that time, and that's exactly what it fed upon to grow. It's very common on a walk in the woods to find patterns like this on fallen trees. This one happens to have the bark all peeled off and exposed, but sometimes if you peel the bark off of the trees, you can find it too. Now, if you've ever heard about bark beetles before, you may have heard about them in a negative context. To be sure, there's an awful lot of problems with bark beetles. In some areas of the country, bark beetles are killing vast amounts of trees. It's certainly a problem. In fact, many of the stories we hear about insects talk about their negative impacts. For you and me, we may be most familiar with cockroaches or houseflies or something like that that's a problem around our homes. Now, while those may be the insects that interact with us most commonly, at least around our homes, I would say for the vast majority of insects in the world, they are beneficial to us. In fact, I would like to conclude by talking about what I think is probably one of the most misunderstood groups of insects that there is. And that is the flies. Now, for most of you who know me, it won't surprise you to learn that I own a 600-page book all about the flies. But the flies really deserve it. They are perhaps, as I mentioned, one of the most misunderstood groups of insects. In fact, as I'm talking about flies, can any of you picture a single fly besides the housefly? Maybe a horsefly? Okay, maybe. Maybe a mosquito? They're flies. Maybe a crane fly? Well, there's many, many more besides that. And the number of good things that flies do for us far, far outweigh the number of bad things. For example, here is a really cool kind of fly. It's a kind of robber fly that actually mimics a bumblebee. And I bet you can see the resemblance. So you can also see the smaller fly that it's caught in its mouth. So the flies are just amazingly diverse for things like this. Now let me flip forward, because here is another kind of fly that mimics bees. That one looks a lot more like a honeybee. This fly belongs to the group known as the flower flies or the hover flies. They're incredibly important pollinators. In fact, it's widely believed that after the bees, which are the world's most important pollinators, flies are the world's second most important pollinators. They're incredibly, incredibly good at what they do, and they pollinate maybe not so many crops as bees do, but a tremendous diversity of plants. In fact, if you're all chocolate lovers like me, you should know that you have a fly to thank for pollinating the chocolate plant, and not a bee or any other animal. It's a fly. Now, another really cool thing about the flower flies is that some of them are amazing mimics, such as this one, or perhaps that one. Tell me if you saw that on a plant, you wouldn't think it's a wasp. But it's not a wasp. That is in fact a fly. So I could go on with the flies. I could show you some that are beautiful metallic greens and blues. I could show you some that are really, really big, and an awful lot that are really, really, really small. But all in all, when we're talking about flies, we're talking about a group that is incredibly diverse, has an awful lot of species present in the planet, and does a lot more for us and for our environment than people have ever realized. And the same is true of any bug I might name, like cockroaches, perhaps, or termites. Why do termites eat the wood in our houses? Well, because they eat the wood in nature. They recycle it. And again, just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm not saying that we shouldn't defend our homes if they get attacked by termites or any other pest. I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to remove insects that are a problem for us. But I think that in the world at large, it's good to know the place of insects, and that place is that of a helper and not a foe to humanity. So, I hope that this brief tour of the insects has been useful to everybody. So there's so much that we could talk about with the insects that we barely just scratched the surface. For example, we haven't talked about all the ways that insects actually impact our agriculture in positive ways besides pollination. We haven't talked about how they aerate the soil, and we haven't talked about the roles they played in the food chain and how vital they are to birds as they raise their nestlings. All of those things are definitely important ways that insects benefit the planet Earth, and that the planet Earth could not go on without them. So, if you have any questions, for sure, feel free to post them, and I will do my best to try to answer them for you. Thank you so much.